Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video I kind of want to talk about Battlegrounds and the shift that we have experienced in the last couple of seasons regarding the tactics, the attack tactics, the fact that Battlegrounds are now utilizing also Alliance War offensive defensive tactics, the introduction of offensive tactics to begin with, and well, obviously my own personal feedback to it. Now keep in mind that for most part I think Kabam has done quite a serviceable job choosing the tactics. I have liked some metas more than others, as you would expect. I do think that victory track metas, typically are relatively, well, I'd call them too mild. I'd say they're much more like arena-like, I would say, in most cases, which I don't necessarily think it should be the case. I don't think those metas should be necessarily limiting in terms of roster, which they're not at the moment, but I do think that they should add a slightly larger level of difficulty. That said, I completely and fully understand that there's always mixed opinions about it. For instance, a lot of people initially protested against the armor burn meta, which is arguably the hardest victory track meta that we have had. But now that I talk to those same people, they said it was the best meta and they miss it. So it's just a food for thought. Again, we are different. We will have different perspectives here for sure. However, one problem, number one here, I would say that with introducing Alliance War offensive and defensive tactics in Battlegrounds, immediately, I think, kind of cuts off the more casual players and makes the whole game mode a lot less enjoyable for them. Because requiring, the hardcore grinders, the tier 1 masters players, the plat players, and just in general the people who play the game more actively in the Battlegrounds themselves, requiring those people, those players, to learn exactly which champions are Decay and which champions are Sugar Pill, fine. If it was just that. But when these metas start, when somebody gets to the Gladiator circuit or whatnot, and even climbing the victory track, them not knowing and not knowing these things, you don't really expect. There is a reason why in the lower tiers of Alliance War we don't have these tactics, right? There are good reasons for that, and why in the middle tiers of Alliance War we still don't have those tactics, and then only at the very tippy top we have, versions of these attack and defensive tactics. And I think introducing these in Battlegrounds kind of across the board kind of loses that bit. So I'm sure that, also a lot of newer players don't necessarily enjoy the fact that they now need to go and filter by hashtags, learn the group of champions, and so on and so forth. However, that wouldn't even be the biggest issue, obviously, coming from my side. For me, well, first of all, again, having the attacker tactic kind of seems unnecessary. Like, for most part. Having set different nodes that we need to find and figuring out the challenges on defenders, it's fine. What's the best way to explain this one? It's almost like how I personally somewhat prefer dungeons over the incursions, just because it was less RNG. And now that there's an extra modifier, I'm just not too sure, because at the moment, especially this season, Decay attack tactic is insanely strong compared to the Sugar Pill defensive node. And we're kind of put in the predicament where so much more is draft dependent and everybody's using even smaller set of champions. There's a lot less room for originality. There's a lot less room for using your own favorite champions or you trying to force them in. Because if, somebody places a long shot on defense and you don't have a Decay attacker, you just automatically die. That's how powerful that Sugar Pill can be on defense, right? And then we have Decay, where it works on even non-Sugar Pill defenders, and therefore all of a sudden, for instance, champions like Domino do no damage at Tuma is like literally defensively worthless for most part. And so on and so forth, because, most of the champions are just unable to damage you with their effects, which is a big part of the game that you get to completely ignore now. Now, so many more champions have access to slow that they can work around, so on and so forth. So, ultimately, I think this is completely different. The sense, the feeling, the energy playing Battlegrounds, the thought process in drafting this season especially is completely different and not for the better. Like there are like 4 champions offensively that are insane and are pretty much, if you don't have one of those 4 to face up another one of those 4, you're probably gonna lose. Like if you're going up against Titania and if you're planning to throw a Decay, Sugar Pill Defender down, you're gonna lose because Titania ramps up twice as fast and, the damage just goes brutal. And I did like a rank 2 Sasquatch in like 43 seconds with a rank 2 Titania. So what you can do to that? Nothing. And, if opponent has a Titania and I just don't drop Sugar Pill Defender, he's gonna lose. If I drop a Sugar Pill Defender, then it's gonna be a race. And what I'm trying to get at the moment, a lot more of these things are kind of dependent on which Sugar Pill and Decay champions you have ranked up, much more so than normally the metas would involve. We have a ton of people who are struggling a lot more this season because of it, and a ton of people who are excelling because they just happen to have the right champions ranked, and that does make a major, major difference. And then there's obviously the draft as well. Like, so much depends right now on how many Decay attackers you have drafted. If it's not enough and then your opponent drops the 3rd Decay champion, you kind of automatically lose. And I just think that these new interactions and new mechanics, kind of like new power balance in a sense that gets introduced here, is definitely not enjoyable. Like, if you would ask me a question, do I enjoy this type of meta more, or crit me with your best shot, or safeguard, or many of the other random metas that were before, I would say that with a possible exception of a couple really, really easy metas where it was basically just complete nuke fiesta and nodes didn't matter at all, this is the second worst level. Right? I think the worst victory track metas are when the nodes don't matter. And we have had plenty of those metas. I think that is the worst. And then I think the second worst thing is something like this, where it's so kind of funneled in specifically in the direction that Kabam wants us to, and then we're kind of stripped of our own agency in our choices. Every other meta, people can run some random champions that others wouldn't. In this, it's practically impossible. There's much less room for option, for creativity, for interesting and weird matchups, because the matchups are made it so that unless you have one of these specific counters, you die. And then there are a lot of these kind of specific matchups, right? It just feels so much more artificially manufactured and a lot less, interactive to the player. In this meta, it kind of feels like I'm playing through, almost like as if I'm playing through like pre-prepared some sort of map or a maze or a story content. Versus Battlegrounds in the generic metas typically feel like I'm able to kind of do whatever, experiment, add in more certain champions, cut out, most champions from one class, whatever I feel like doing. Obviously, there will always be some champions who do better or worse, but in this case, yeah, it just seems kind of like done by Kabam for us and not in a good way. Like, you have to have these specific champions in order to be able to defeat these specific champions, right? And then, if you don't get to draft enough of these, you lose. And if you don't get to draft enough of these, you probably lose too. And you better hope that when you draft, you get a good mix and a good balance of all of them, even though you still have to add in some other specific champion. You know what I mean? It just does not sit well with me, personally. And again, I'm sure that somebody is going to take the advantage, says, this KT1, he's always complaining. No, this is a genuine feedback. I'm not saying this is like some devastatingly horrible thing that Kabam did. I am giving a genuine, honest feedback that I think this is worse than what we had before. And for most part, I think Kabam has done a good job. I also do think that 2 metas is too few for a season, especially when the nodes are like this. It gets extremely tedious and fast. But that whole issue put aside, yeah, I just don't think why this was needed. I don't think this is better. I think this makes Battlegrounds less enjoyable. And I'd love, see the attacker tactics dropped, ideally, so we don't have extra incentive to go for these specific 15 champions. And if they are using some attacker nodes, then don't make them a must-have this node active in order to be able to, fight, pretty much. Because yeah, this is not optional. Like the previous attacker nodes, boosting tech champions, realistically, we kind of just ignored them. We had hardly any more tech champions than we normally would. Initially, I thought like, oh, I'm going to be running a lot of tech champions because of the Fury buffs. And then when the metas actually started, I ended up running exactly the same amount of tech champions as I normally do, or potentially even less. And that was fine. That was something you can opt in, I guess. I still wasn't a fan of it, but it didn't bother me as much. Here, when you have absolutely no choice but to hit hard with those Decay attackers in science and skill class, I'm like, nope, this feels significantly different and significantly worse. So, I would love to hear what are your thoughts and opinions of, the current nodes and the fact that we are using alliance war tactics defensively and offensively, the fact that attacker nodes are introduced, and all that other good stuff. And quick reminder, I will be uploading week 3 and 4 MVP video either later today or tomorrow. We'll see about that. But yeah, hit that like button, hit that sub button, and I'm going to catch you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about